Hi, and welcome to the show where we share the stories of the many who intersect with our healthcare system but are rarely heard from. My name is Kevin Poe, founder and editor of Kevin MD. Today on the show, we have Theresa Rohr-Kirchgraber. She is a professor of clinical internal medicine and pediatrics at the Indiana University School of Medicine. And she's the co-author of a recent Kevin MD article, The Guilt of Not Being on the Front Lines of the Pandemic. Theresa, welcome to the show.
Oh, thank you, Kevin. Thanks for asking.
So we're going to get into your article in a little bit, but first
Okay.
off, can you share your story and your journey to where you are today?
Sure. I'm originally from Los Angeles and went to medical school in New York City and residency in Cleveland. I am an internal medicine and adolescent medicine boarded physician, currently living and working in Indianapolis. I am clinically 60% of my time seeing primary care patients, as well as some of my time doing eating disorders, especially in adults, and then spend approximately 40% of my time as the executive director of the IU National Center of Excellence for Women's Health, a program through the IU School of Medicine to increase care for women across the state, but also to increase physician leadership from the Women in Medicine group.
Wonderful. So I want to get into the article that you co-wrote, The Guilt of
Sure.
Not Being on the Front Lines of the Pandemic. And I want to start with reading an excerpt. The article starts, do all physicians and scientists not on the front lines of this pandemic feel this, or is it unique to women? Women in medicine and science have long struggled with a sense of never having done enough and have pushed themselves even harder to get the same recognition accorded our male colleagues. Does that make us more vulnerable to guilt, or are we holding ourselves to unreasonable expectations? Theresa, can you share the story behind the article and why you and your group decided to write it?
Oh, yes. So it was a virtual wellness group that had been set up by one of the members of our department for the women physicians to kind of get together. We have had meetings in the past, but with the pandemic and social distancing, we weren't getting together, and having this organization or having this meeting was meant to have a time to share. Some women had glasses of wine, some had coffee, some had kids running in the background. But it was just a time for us to kind of share. There were division chiefs as well as young new faculty. So it was a little bit of everything. Some are MDs, some are PhDs. But one of the common things that kind of came out was how we were feeling. Here it was 4:00 on the middle of a work day, and we were on this call. We had been getting all of the comments, all of the sightings, all the stories. We're reading things on our Facebook and Twitter feeds, and we're feeling pretty bad for all of those that are out there. And we started to kind of talk amongst ourselves about, well, what were we really doing? And the guilt that we felt from not being on the front lines. And even some of the folks that were on the call, I mean, they're hospitalists, but they weren't in the ICU. And so we started to kind of talk about, what is it that the expectation was? What is it that we should be doing? And why do we have this sense of guilt? When one of my neighbors did this beautiful chalk drawing at the end of our driveway that said, two superheroes live here. And as much as I really appreciated that, I also felt a little guilty about, that they were doing it for me and I wasn't really that much of a hero. And as we spoke about it, we realized too that, this is such a common feeling for most of the women that I know. No matter what you do, it never seems to be quite enough.
I think this article really resonated with me as well because I'm in primary care internal medicine. My hours had been cut. The clinical medicine I was doing was all virtual medicine or telemedicine. I'm spending a lot of time at home with my kids, and the guilt that you described, it was something that I was feeling as well. Now, what came up from this conference? What are some tips that you gave to people who were feeling this type of guilt?
So a number of things. One, what the biggest thing that came out of it is that we got together and rewrote this together. There were a number of us, we went back and forth. We said, that there's probably a lot more people than just us feeling this way. And by putting this article together, by being able to have it placed on your website, in the blog, it was great because it reached so many more folks. And I got numerous phone calls and emails and things back about, thanks for saying this. I didn't know, I felt so alone. And just by knowing that other people have that similar kind of feeling, it gave some comfort. So from that perspective, it kind of actually did a fair amount. We got technically a publication and out of it. We got information and we were able to share things with others. Some of our faculty actually got onto a news show about it. It got put into Women for Change, which is an organization, or a bipartisan organization for women to make changes in politics. And so it was helpful, I think, because it was allowed us to reach a larger audience, and so that not just physicians were in the same boat, not just the scientists were feeling these same feelings, but that everybody felt in some way that they needed to do more. So it was incredibly impactful, I think, for folks like yourself to say, I'm not the only one. And also to recognize that what you are doing is important. You've probably had situations with patients that were, wondering, gosh, I'm not doing enough. What else can I do? I'm making masks and for you to be able to tell them, no, by the fact that you are isolating, social distancing, that is impactful. You don't have to be out there intubating people and putting them on the front lines. Those little things that you're doing, reaching out to your neighbor, writing letters, making phone calls to those that might be shut in, all of those things have impact.
So we are now talking in the first week of June, and you wrote that article at the end of April. So is there anything that you know now that you wish you knew back before the pandemic to those people who may not be on the front lines?
I think that even then, we have to be very cognizant of how we do negative talk to ourselves or to others. I think since this whole episode, I've become more aware of when I'm doing negative self-talk. And we've been talking to others as well about taking out certain words. For example, take out the word just or but. They're so diminutive. I'm just a medical student. I'm just a mom. No. And in fact, I had that conversation with one of my medical students this morning. She said, oh, sorry, but I'm like, okay, look, that one goes out too. You're not sorry. It doesn't, you just say, oh, let me have a minute. Let me get this. I said, oh, I'm so sorry. No, because it sets up kind of a negative connotation in the listener's mind. So I think probably even at the beginning, I would have been more proactive about getting rid of that negative self-talk. And since that time, I've been more proactive in my own life about giving myself credit. I used to drive home thinking of all the things I didn't do. Did I check that enough? Did I check that number? Oh, maybe I should have given this medicine instead of that. Mm-hmm. And by the end of the day, I'm so frustrated with all the things I should have done. So now I've decided, forget that, baby. Now I drive home, I'm thinking of the 2 good things that I did today. Even if it's just somebody smiled when we made a joke, or we commented on this great piece of jewelry that the patient was wearing. It doesn't have to be something phenomenal, but we have to feel better about what we've been doing and give ourselves credit. So I'm also trying to work with others, my patients, my staff, my other colleagues, so that whenever they start this kind of negative self-talk, that we can kind of redirect them. Because we're all here for a purpose. We all have goals and aspirations, and we're all doing good in some way, shape, or form. But we just have to recognize it.
I think that's wonderful advice. I want to take a step back now and ask you something that you've been curious about or something that you've been passionate about over the last few months.
Oh, goodness. I think that my passion has only increased significantly around issues of diversity. This pandemic has showed so much how many people are impacted, and not just because of the virus, but because of other things that they don't have as much control over. I think I've been very concerned about diversity for many, many years. but this pandemic and showing the differences in healthcare disparities, it made me be even more enthusiastic about making some changes, even small changes. So for example, we did a study last summer called Diversity on the Walls, where we actually walked around the walls of the School of Medicine here in Indianapolis. And we only looked at those walls that you could easily see. So medical student faculty, we didn't go behind closed doors or locked things that needed special permission. And all we did was that we looked to see what was on the wall. We graduated our first African-American physician in 1908. His picture is not in the class picture. There is not now one picture of an African-American physician or scientist on the walls of one of the largest medical schools in the country. It's 2020. We have one picture of a woman. Marianne Couch was our chair of ENT a couple of years ago. She's the only woman physician or scientist that we have on the walls. So even though we did this study last year, we had done some documentation, we had done presentations about it, I think this pandemic and the health disparities that we've recognized with it made me be even more emphatic about the fact that we're going to change this. We're going to change it in October. We're getting funding to put together at least 4 portraits, 4 pictures along with the stories. It's going to have 2 African-American physicians and it's going to have 2 women physicians, and we're going to, by God, get them on the wall so that we won't have another medical student walking around saying, you know, nobody here looks like me. So we don't have another faculty member saying, you know, I'm new here, but gosh, you know, I don't see a lot of female representation. We're just going to change it. Come hell or high water, we're just going to do it. And we're not going to wait around and, you know, look for a million different people to tell us how. We're just going to do it. We're going to do it ourselves and get it done. And so even though it was probably a kind of a byproduct, it just over these last few months, as you really recognize the differences of, you know, what people have, you know, my patients who now no longer can come see me because they lost their insurance, because they lost their job. I mean, those kinds of things, it tears at you, and we have to make a difference from that perspective.
Well, thank you so much for sharing that. And I have one last question for you, and that's, sure, what's your take-home message for the Kevin MD audience?
Oh, keep listening and keep sharing. You never realize the impact that you have. You write something or you read something and you think it's just that one person that's looking at it. No. I think having this ability to discuss, to put your feelings out there, you do not know what an impact it can make on somebody who is far away, who never knew you before. Just like this kind of an interaction. It's phenomenal. It really is. And Kevin, I thank you for having this ability to gather people together in very unusual situations, and they can go and look at it at nights, weekends, or whatever, just to be able to have that ability to share. So I would encourage everybody not only to read your blog, but to share it and to get others to kind of listen in, because we're all in this together, no matter where you're from, no matter how big you are. And we have to have each other in order to move forward.
Well, thank you so much for sharing your insight, wisdom, and inspiration. On the show, we have Theresa Rohr-Kirchgraber. She is a professor of clinical internal medicine and pediatrics at the Indiana School of Medicine. And she is the co-author of the Kevin MD article, The Guilt of Not Being on the Front Lines of the Pandemic. Theresa, thank you so much for being on the show.
Appreciate it, Kevin.